you guys hear me? Maybe? Okay, we're gonna try this out, and if it doesn't work, that sounds weird, right? Super weird. Okay, so we should not do this. Okay, cool. So hi, I'm Madeline, as he mentioned. How's that?
How about that? Oh, so much better. These things are always weird anyway, and they're so on. Okay, beautiful. So, can I just say, what is happening? I came here thinking I'm gonna give these students some encouragement. They're working hard at Harvard. I know how that goes, just your head is in the books, the season has begun, and you guys need encouragement, but I came here and just feel like I've been bolstered in my faith and fed by you, and I haven't even been here more than 25 minutes, so thank you for being amazing people and for having such clear hearts to the Lord. It's really, really encouraging. So as I start, just to tell you a little bit about who I am, it always helps to know who you're listening to. I was born in Southern California and raised there. Anybody else? Come on. That's all right. Yeah, people always ask me, why did you move to like the Northeast, like from Southern California? I'm like, I don't know where the confusion is. Like, I wanted to learn how to dodge man-sized potholes while also figuring out streets that don't exist and learning to park in parking spots that aren't there, and all these wonderful things. I actually love it here, which is fun. I've been here about a year now. And basically what I do ever since I graduated from Oxford is going around to universities like this. And for me, it's primarily in New England. And I basically talk about the questions that students are having regarding faith, life, God, mainly around the questions and objections around Christianity. And so as I go and engage in these campuses, I mainly talk about kind of the key, most like dominant and familiar questions that people have. So why does a good God allow suffering? Isn't the Bible sexist? Why do we need God in the modern day? Hasn't science ruled out religion? These are the types of questions that I'm facing and challenging in these university settings. And one thing, just as I begin, that I've been blown away by is that I always thought that those were really the questions. Like when people ask that, is because that was really what was keeping them from believing. But what I've found is that and you've probably heard this phrase, there's always a question behind the question. So I don't know how many questions it takes. I haven't figured out the math of this yet. It'd be awesome if I could, okay, 17, 18, like we're about to get there. But the reality is there is a sense of a theme that I've been seeing especially in the last year of engaging with people at campuses all around the world. One of the most interesting to me, and one of the deepest, I think, was when I was in Cardiff, Wales in November. And I was at Cardiff Metropolitan University, and I was speaking on suffering, something totally unrelated to the question that a student named Lucy had. But she basically came up to me and she's like, just this fiery ball of energy, and she had red hair to go with it, and it was just like, okay, I'm here, like listening, go for it. And it was question after question after question. So I said, Lucy, can we just go get a meal? Like, it's been 3 hours and I haven't eaten. I said, okay, yeah, fine, but like, let's go, So we go to get lunch, and it's another 2 hours of just talking through issues she had with the church. And the reality was she had dealt with a lot of pain at the hands of the church, which was hard to hear, as it always is. And eventually she started opening up a bit more. And what she said was that just in terms of her personal life, her mom had died just 2 years before I met her. And who she called her best friend, the person who knew her the most, had been through the most with her, had betrayed her in that year. And so for her, it was just like the end of everything. And I noticed as she was talking, like her sleeves were moving up and down. I noticed that she had scars all over her arm, just from times when she had been hurting and cutting herself. And I was like, Lucy, clearly you have been through so much. You've experienced so much of life, things that I've never experienced. Like, where are you at? Like, what's really the question that's keeping you up at night? What's the thing that gets you, that really is the root of all these questions you've been asking me? I said, Lucy, just tell me, like, what do you desire most right now to know? And she said this, which I thought was quite profound. She said, a partner in life. She said, someone who won't die or leave me when they find out my issues. And I was like, I get that. It seemed that even though she had all these intellectual holdups, it seemed, to Christianity, what she really desired more than anything, what her real question was if she was worthy of a certain kind of love. Like, that was really the thing that was getting her and that was holding her. And then just a few weeks after that, I was at a different university, still in Wales. And have you guys heard of Texitosi? I feel like you do those here. I'm pretty sure you could do it in the UK, right? Fun, right? So basically, if you don't know, you either sometimes you dial a donut. So basically, people text in a question they have about Christianity. You go to dormitories, you give them either a grilled cheese, which is called a toasty in the UK, or you give them a donut and you sit and talk with them and answer their questions. And so while I was basically doing Texitosi, one of the first dorms that I went to, which ended up being the only dorm I went to that night because I was there for so long, but basically a girl came to the door named Siobhan, and she, so Siobhan had just was interesting, and she immediately started talking to me about she was just very free, at least that's what it seemed. And she's like, you wouldn't like the kind like me. So I sleep around a lot, okay? And her friends were giggling. I'm like, all right, let's talk about it. And we're just getting into this, and she keeps mentioning comments like that, just like putting herself in a category and calling herself names. And we're talking through all these questions. There's about 6 of us, so it was lots of people were part of the conversation. And I had never had a chance to talk with Siobhan alone. So I'm walking out of this dormitory, and it had been 5 hours. I had missed a big central event that I wanted to be at. I was like, well, this is way better and richer, but wow, people can talk, right? So I'm walking out of the dorm, and Siobhan runs after me, and she was very just high energy person. And she goes, wait, I have to ask you a question. And I was like, yeah, so I've been here, so how do you not answer this question? She's like, I don't want to say it in front of everyone. It's okay. And I'm just gonna say what she said to me. So pardon my language, but she said, Madeline, I'm not joking. I really am a whore. She said, do you honestly think that Jesus loves me? And she was just looking at me. She basically whispered it. She was completely serious. She didn't want to admit in front of her friends, but she cared deeply if she was potentially still a possibility of being worthy of God's love. And so in these kind of conversations, just to give you an example, through my own story and then through continuing these conversations with students, I've just been thinking over the last couple of years about this issue of shame, about what it means to feel fundamentally unworthy of love. See, I used to thinking about shame, and I always have said, shame's a big part of my story, and I thought I knew what I was talking about. I always thought that shame was just the times in your life where you've done something that's really explicitly wrong, and that you're embarrassed about, and you feel immense guilt about it. It had to do with a particular action. But as shame is kind of coming out of the cobwebs, and we're starting to talk about it more in psychology, in different fields, in sociology, what we're finding is that shame is much deeper and much wider than just a particular moment of transgression or of moral weakness. Shame actually, as Brene Brown, who I'm sure many of you have heard of, she's considered the researcher on shame today. She talks about shame as the intensely painful feeling of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love or belonging. I would say that shame is simply the crippling feeling of feeling as though you're not enough. So it's really a question of your identity, not of behavior. So as we enter into this topic, I want to talk quite a bit about what is the process that we actually go through when forming our identities. The people in this room, how is it that you've come to understand who you really are? Or I'm sure most of us are in process. I think that we'll eventually talk about shame. I think it's the greatest hindrance to really being who you were made to be. But first we need to understand identity formation. And I think that primarily when we think about who we are, if I was to ask you who you are, we're going to start talking about things that we do, things that we feel, right? Or things that we think. So if you want to get worried, it's like the existential, like, what am I feeling? What's my gut about certain things? That's part of what defines me, right? Or it's the pragmatic, like what I do, what sports I do, what school I go to, what activities I like, that's who I am, right? Or it's thinking, it's the epistemology of life. It's what do you know, and how does that affect how you live? Those are kind of things we think. And I think in our culture, the way that works out is, I think you would probably agree with me, if I'm gonna evaluate someone, maybe I wouldn't say evaluate their worth, and I wouldn't say that out loud, but evaluate who I think they are, I would probably think about what they look like. I think about what they do, what their career is, like what they've achieved. I think about what possessions they own, what kind of clothes they're wearing. And these days more than ever, there's sexual identity, right? There's a sense that those things are part of who we are. And I think in our Western culture, we're encouraged in this way. Emphasize your individuality, right? What makes you unique? What makes you sitting here tonight special? I'm a student at Harvard. I'm a tennis player. I'm a homosexual. I'm a heterosexual. I'm intelligent. I'm the funny one. I'm liberal. I'm conservative. I'm a photographer. Yes, these are things that I do and like believe, but they're also sort of like who I am. There's a really small distinction between the two. I don't know about you, but I mean, one of the main questions that people ask you is like, so what's your hobby? I like break out in a cold sweat. I'm like, this will surely define me. Like, surely. And I have so few. I'm like, who am I? Am I anything? It feels that way. I've always felt that way about that question. And then we have social media coming into it, which now is just this tornado of a thing. Like, we are expressing ourselves in every need and mode possible. And it's, for me at least, it creates this kind of cognitive dissonance at times, right? It's between my embodied self, like who I am and relating to other people and what people that know me personally think about me, know me day to day. And then the separation between that embodied self and my actual like operating identity that I can tweak and edit and repost and delete and use those crazy apps that make you look thinner and like things are getting wild. Right? I didn't know this was a thing. I'm like, well, can't I trust anything I see anymore? Now, I don't want you to get me wrong. Obviously, our qualities, what makes us unique, our attributes, our accomplishments, those things, even on a Christian worldview, are not things to hide. They're not things to be ashamed of. God forbid in this talk. Like, they're things to celebrate, I believe. But the thing that I'm trying to get to here, my point, is that problems start to arise in us when we start to identify those as our core identity, right? As who we are. And the reason for that is very simple. And I'm sure you've heard this fact before, that those things are clearly conditional. They're not reliable by any means. Things that can be taken or changed at any given moment. Rafael Nadal, right? Like, he's an incredible tennis player. He's been incredible, he's been rising, but people just think like, this guy is unbelievable. Does anyone here like him or care? Oh, yeah. Okay, like, guys, I'm like not a sports person, that's him. So he has, so people have been worried, like, when is an injury gonna strike? What's gonna happen to him? Is he gonna be on this road? How many more years has he got? Like, this guy's just phenomenal. And lo and behold, his knees are starting to give him problems, right? And media has been saying, like, this might be it. This might be over for him. And he's, like, super offended. He's like, it's not over for me, my knees are fine. Like, let's get out there. He's offended. But the reality is, like, eventually, his career will be over. And that day will come. I actually know someone from Malibu High that's just hit it close to home, what my point is, for me. I have a family friend from Malibu area, and she went to Malibu High. And her goal was to go to Yale. How do you feel about Yale in this room? Is that like... I'm pretty sure it's the real thing. It's the real thing. See, my understanding of that relationship is from Gilmore Girls. I knew one coming out. So, her dream has been to go to Yale. So she went to Malibu High. Only one girl has ever gone to Yale from Malibu High. I don't know what that says about Malibu High, but that's just the situation. And she got in, okay? So obviously this semester has just started. Within her first week at Yale, there was this horrible accident, and basically she got hit with a really pushed with a very heavy door, and she's on the top of a marble staircase. So she fell down the staircase and has a brain injury from this. So she's out, at least for the semester, just until we figure out how much damage has been done. But you understand, this can happen to any of us, and we know this. It's just in a moment, that thing that was the goal, it just can disappear. So we have to consider this question, even though it does, I know, seem like an abstract concept to analyze together. I think it's very much of day-to-day importance. So it might not be as obvious to you what that thing is in your life that's very central to core. What do you just think, no, that's fundamental to who I am? Something in your life that, if I didn't have X, I wouldn't be recognizable. Or if I didn't do X or think X. It's like everyone knows when they think of me, they think of that thing. Come up with that in your mind. What is the thing, if there is one, that you might slip into really feeling like that's who you are? What would that be for you? One of the honest ways to consider that question, if it is really obvious, maybe you're just no, I don't do the thing. But one way to think about that, and this is really, for me, this makes it really obvious, is what's the last time where you felt really, somebody said something that really hit a nerve with you? Maybe they made a comment about something where it just hit too close to home. Oftentimes the things we're most sensitive about are the things that are much more part of our central identity. So I know for me personally, having gone to Oxford and then going into and doing this job that I do, which is honestly living in an intellectual sphere, I can't help but struggle at times to feel okay, I've been affirmed in these ways, I've been given this opportunity. What if they find out I'm a fraud? I'm not really capable. I don't really live up to the standard of what I should be to have this position. What if they just called and said, Madeline, it's been a good trial run, but we know you now and we don't want you in this position. How would I deal with that? Or if Oxford called and said, for whatever reason, your degree wasn't legitimate. You really don't have a degree. How does that change how I feel about my identity and my worth at that point? Do I still feel I have something to offer? Do I still feel, where do I get my confidence from? I think it's helpful, at least been for me, Tim Keller is prone to do this, but to think about the ways that we form identity in contrast to ways that are very unique. So if you think about the non-Western way of identity formation, what you'll find in more of the Eastern countries is that it's always identity comes from actually honoring your community or honoring your family to the point where they actually admire you, which here is what a concept. They actually admire you when you actually suppress your individual interests for the sake of the whole. That's what they think is honorable. So that's how you get your identity. I've been good to my family. I've bestowed honor upon them. In the West, I don't think it could look more different at this point. And there's a sociologist called Robert Bellah, and he's really good on talking about how our intense individualism has just grown ever since World War II and into our postmodern time that we're in now. And he says it's like this. He says, no one can tell you who you are. You must look inside of yourself, figure out what makes you you, and then learn how to express that. No one can define you. You define yourself. I just think of whatever that girl Haley. I love me, I love myself, and I don't think anyone else. I should not have done that. I don't think. But that's what just happened. So we're gonna move on. But that idea, we hear that song and we're that is horrible. And then we're I don't know how far off it is though. And I think there's something here that is worth thinking through. David Leone is a sociologist from Edinburgh, and he gives us a little more clarity into where the stew that the pot that we're all stewing in. He says that there's a plastic self and there's an expressed self. The plastic self says to make identity as flexible as possible. Experience as much as you can. So don't limit yourself by saying you're one way or the other. Be open to all experiences. The expressed self says actually you should seek authenticity and completion of the inner narrative by what you express externally. So whether that's organic, encourage you are, but say what you think, get your thoughts out there, whatever mode that is, that's actually part of creating who you are. So the combination of these two dynamics when it comes to identity is that we both feel like very exhilarated by it, like there's never been a better time, I can be anyone I want to be. I can craft my own identity, and that is beautiful in a way. But there's another part of us that is, massive anxiety attack. And I don't think it's detached, our anxiety, from the fact that we now have infinite possibility of what we could become. Because we don't necessarily know who we are in the deepest sense. We're still trying to figure that out. Like, I'm someone with conflicting desires. I'm someone with some desires that aren't good. Like, what do I do with these things, right? There's actually, I was surprised. There was a interview of Madonna, who, of course, is like one of the most, talented artists of our time, definitely of our generation. Where we admire Madonna, cannot admire Madonna for her talent and for her career. And there was a recent interview that she did where she was basically asked about what gives her motivation. And this is what she said, and I want you to listen to this. She said, "My drive in life comes from a fear of being mediocre. This is always pushing me. I push past one spell of it and discover myself as a special human being, but then I feel I'm mediocre and uninteresting until I prove that I'm not. Because even though I have become somebody, I still have to prove that I'm somebody. My struggle has never ended, and I'm guessing it never will." And that's Madonna. So yes, we can be whoever we want to be. The sky is the limit. And many people in this room will do incredible things with their lives, with your lives. But it's important to recognize that even the most successful people still are dealing with feeling inadequate. So what does that help to illuminate for us as we think for our own identity? There's a recent TED Talk by Alain de Botton, who's an English, he calls himself a secularist, he's a British secularist. And he says that this kind of freedom it's exhilarating if you're doing well, and it's crushing if you're not. It leads in the worst cases to increased rates of suicide. Emil Durkheim is a very famous researcher, and she's found that there are more suicides in developed, individualistic countries than in any other part of the world. And some of the reason for that is that people take what they do and how they do extremely personally. So whether you're succeeding, you'll say, that was all me, and that's a wonderful feeling, and people will be proud of you, as they should be. But if you're failing, it feels as though it is only on you to prove that you're actually something or somebody. Now, if there is no ultimate reality, and this is the apologist in me, but if there is no ultimate reality, if we really are just a cosmic accident, if we're really just time plus matter plus chance, maybe random selection, I don't know where you all fall, if that's what we are, then it makes perfect sense to say that it's up to us to craft our own identity. Who else would craft it? So we should make the most of this short life that we have. But what if that's not the case? What if Christianity is true? What this means, and maybe this is normal to you, because you call yourself, you're a Christian, but in terms of how we engage with the world. If you're a Christian, it's pretty incredible that you believe there are certain things about you being you, about the human person, that's durable. There's certain things that are innate, that are unchanging, that are fixed. Okay? This isn't how most people are understanding identity. And Christianity really flips that model that we've just described on its head. So where most worldviews would say that you are what you think, feel, and do, Christianity would say, no. We define who you are ontologically. It's a matter of your very being. As a human being, made in the image of God, innately valuable, and unbelievably so. That there's an innateness about that has nothing to do with what you do, think, or feel. And has nothing to do with your worth. So as simple as that reality might sound, that Christianity is the reversal of how most people think of identity formation, that's actually incredibly profound, and we need to hang on to that as we engage with people in our lives. I think this truth, getting from our head to our hearts, especially at a place like Harvard, where the expectations on you are so immense, if you can believe, not just in your head, but know it in your heart, that your identity has already been accepted, that your worth has already been decided once and for all, it changes everything. It should change everything about the way that we engage with the world and the way we face failure. Have you guys seen Birdman? Yeah. Okay, so I hardly did that movie, so I feel like it's fake even like talking about it. I need help. But I've only seen it once, so I'm giving myself that. But it's incredible to me, the very first scene of that movie. Do you guys remember like the profound question that's asked at the very beginning of that movie? It's really crazy. Basically, he's asked, so did you get what you wanted to out of life? Right? And he says, I did. He said, okay, so what did you want out of life? And he said, to be able to call myself beloved. I wanted to find myself beloved in the world. Why is that the first line of that movie? I mean, that's incredible. As opposed to these modern patterns of identity formation, the Bible defines this in the context of a relational dynamic. You can't be beloved by yourself. Beloved is innately relational. And Ephesians 2 speaks to a little bit about what that means as you come into an identity, a new identity knowing Christ. Ephesians 2 says, you were once estranged, having been brought near by the blood of Christ. So you're no longer strangers to this God of ultimate reality, but that through the blood of Jesus sacrificing for you, you've been brought to friendship. So who you are isn't just changed in an isolated way, but you're changed in relation to who God made you to be, in relation to Him. So this way, Christianity has this form of identity that's both, it's transformational, but it's also stable, right? It's stable in that that's never going to change. Christ's sacrifice on the cross means that you're accepted by God instantaneously, which really is hard for us to, I think, take in when we are in such an achiever's world. But you're instantaneously accepted when you accept Christ. And yet it's also transformational, right? Someone once called it an ongoing relational project. That's the Christian life. And so it's pretty incredible to have this in contrast to what we just described. So what does it mean to have an identity that's rooted? In Ephesians 3, we read this. For this reason, I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and on earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory, he may grant you to be strengthened with power through the Spirit in your inner being, your inner person, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and the length and the height and the depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses all knowledge, that you may be filled with the fullness of God. This means that the most important thing about you, when we think about core identity, the very most important thing, and the source of your life, of your fullness, comes from finding yourself rooted in the love of God. Now I know I should get too preachy and we're at Harvard, it's supposed to like be somewhat objective, right? But it goes without argument that to be a rooted person, to be a person who's really grounded, you guys, each of you, that is an incredibly revolutionary thing in the midst of a culture that is desperately searching for identity. And those are the people that you are on this campus. People that are grounded and rooted in love. I don't know where you find yourself or what your story has been up to this point, but I do just want to ask you to think anew and afresh. Do you feel yourself rooted in the love of God? Is that the reality you're living in? Dallas Willard talks about how, and you might know Dallas Willard, he was a late theologian, and he concentrated a lot of his work on spiritual formation. And he talked about this. He said the ideal for spiritual life in the Christian understanding is one where all the essential parts of the human self are effectively organized around God, and He restores and sustains them. So have you ever met someone, and I know there's probably people in this room who would say this about you, have you ever met someone who just seems so connected to God that it's like no impending doom has any effect on them? Like no anxiety. Have you ever actually been anxious? Have you ever felt afraid? You just seem so steady. I know I notice it when I meet people like that, and they're rare. And I can't help but wonder, like, how do you do it? What is that? There's a book by David Brooks, right? And he is a New York Times columnist, and he wrote a book called Road to Character. Have you guys read that yet? It's rising all the time on New York Times bestseller lists, and it's a great book. And he says this, and he's a theist of some kind. I'm not sure where he stands in terms of Christianity at this point, but I thought this was very telling as to how it looks to be rooted yourself. He says, occasionally you come across certain people who seem to possess an impressive inner cohesion. They are not leading fragmented, scattershot lives. They have achieved inner integration. They are calm. They're settled. They're rooted. They're not blown off course by storm. They don't crumble in adversity. Their minds are consistent and their hearts dependable. I think the reason why it's so hard, that just seems like this ideal way out there. Like, okay, lady, we're not all sitting on Lululemon yoga mats, like in a garden drinking herbal tea. Like, life is crazy and hard, and having this inner cohesion isn't easy, and you're right. And I feel that. But that's why I think it's worth talking about the rest of this time together. The effect that shame can have in hindering us from finding a peace and a calm in our identity with God that can last us through all circumstances. So as we think about shame, I think that we feel shame for a variety of reasons. Some people in this room have experienced abuse at the hands of other people. Physical, sexual, verbal. It's more common than we can imagine. And this leaves us with a deep sense of shame. Some of you just have secrets. I know I have dealt with this, like just having secrets that you've never told anyone, and you hope they'll always be in the closet. There's no reason anyone would need to find out. And that leads to a sense of shame. Or maybe you're just bombarded constantly by the feeling that you never measure up to the people around you. Some of the most vivid memories in my life are times when I've been shamed. And I think that shame in my life has manifested itself in three main ways, just as I was reflecting. I think one, I've experienced shame as a result of things that have been said or done to me by other people. So negative words spoken over to me that say you're not blank enough. You're not smart enough, funny enough, thin enough, pretty enough. You're not enough. That causes me shame. I can still remember the negative words that have been spoken over to me. And I still have to fight them, even when they were years and years ago. Sometimes I experience the effects of shame due to my own feelings of inadequacy. And this job that I do is a particularly good trigger for that. So it's been a whole new learning experience for me. And third, I think the most intense type of shame I've experienced personally are times in my life when I acted so blatantly against the person that I was claiming to be or that I thought that I was. And I just felt crushed by my own hypocrisy. Like, honestly, like I remember just an example that came to my mind just now. Like in college, I thought of myself as a Christian leader at school. Like I'm someone who people know really loves the Lord, and I hope I'm being a light to people. In my sophomore year, I went abroad and studied in Florence, Italy, for the whole year. And the first time I had been exposed to alcohol, but it was the first time it was like legal and like, oh. And I went for it. Like I remember the first time I just got so plastered in front of my friends. And I was like, who am I? Like it totally shook me up. Because I just felt this sense of shame. Like I was just devastated by my own hypocrisy. Like the thing that I'm speaking against. Like it just was an identity crisis for me. And what's funny about that experience though, guys, is that was actually the first time, and I grew up in a Christian home. I think that was the first time I ever actually experienced God's grace. Because if I was honest, up until that point, I really thought I kind of deserved it. Like, I kind of earned it. I haven't, compared to most people, like, I'm trying. And it was only when I, like, blatantly, publicly, like, harmed the name of God that I was like, wait. Like, you actually still love me the same amount. You actually have forgiven this. Like, I just didn't know. 6 months ago, I gave a talk to a bunch of high schoolers, which is the first and only time I've ever done that. And I gave a talk, and I had talked about some of my experience with shame in it. And a girl came up to me at the end, and we'll call her Blair. But she came up to me, and she just said, it was her first time she'd ever been to a Christian event. I had no clue. And she said, she basically confided, she said, because of your story, I feel willing to say to you that I have never told anyone I was sexually assaulted at 13. She said, I have hated myself every day since. And she said, I have not even been willing to consider the love of God because I can't even forgive myself for letting that happen, let alone putting myself in front of a holy God. That night, thankfully, everything changed for Blair. And it was beautiful. But the reality I'm trying to get at here is that shame is relational. It's about fear. It's about blame. It's about disconnection. Henry Nouwen wrote a book called The Life of the Beloved. And he says this. He says self-rejection, okay? Self-rejection, which is at the heart of shame, is the greatest enemy to the spiritual life because it contradicts the secret voice that calls us the beloved. Being the beloved constitutes the core truth of our existence. When I am living in the confidence that I'm not just a collocation of atoms that's responsible for all of my own issues and has no hope ultimately,